Daniel Harrington's heels clicked sharply on the wet pavement as he crossed the street, the cold drizzle of rain still clinging to his designer coat. He hadn't noticed the damp until it soaked through the tips of his shoes. Normally, minor discomforts didn't faze him, but now his mind was in chaos. The sight of his mother leaning on a teenage boy had shaken something loose inside him, something he hadn't felt in years, a mixture of fear, disbelief, and an unfamiliar surge of protectiveness. He had trained himself to control every situation, to anticipate and dominate every outcome, but this was unpredictable, untamed. The boy, Marcus, Daniel would soon learn, was slight, almost fragile-looking, but there was a quiet confidence in the way he held himself, even as he instinctively stepped back when Daniel's commanding presence reached them. Daniel's mother, Evelyn, stood with an elegance that defied the chill of the evening, but even her poise could not completely mask the slight tremor of weakness that had caused her to rely on a stranger for support. Her silver hair, usually so meticulously styled, was loose around her face, damp and shining under the streetlights, and the faint crease of worry on her forehead only intensified Daniel's alarm. "Mom," he called again, more sharply this time, urgency lacing every syllable. Evelyn turned slowly, her expression calm, serene almost, as if she had been expecting him. "Daniel," she said softly, her voice a gentle contrast to the harsh pounding of his heart. The boy stiffened immediately, as if sensing Daniel's judgment, and he lowered his gaze. His hoodie hung loosely over thin shoulders, jeans frayed at the knees, sneakers barely holding together. Daniel didn't care about appearances, not usually. But tonight, he saw something more than poverty. He saw vulnerability, and he hated the idea that anyone, especially his mother, could be exposed to danger in his absence. I was just helping her, sir," the boy muttered quickly, his voice low, almost apologetic. She looked dizzy. Daniel's gaze narrowed. He didn't acknowledge the boy. His focus was entirely on his mother. He moved faster, closing the distance between them, instinctively wrapping an arm around her shoulders. The motion was protective, possessive. He would not allow anything to happen to her, not here, not ever. "Mom, why are you out here?" he demanded, his tone sharp, tinged with fear. "You should have called me. Or the driver. Or anyone." Evelyn's eyes met his, unwavering. She did not flinch, did not panic. She simply looked at him, almost amused by his intensity. "I didn't faint, Daniel," she said quietly. "I was sitting. Talking." Daniel's eyes snapped to the boy. "Talking. With him." The teenager looked uneasy, tugging slightly at the straps of his backpack as if preparing to disappear into the night. Daniel's chest tightened with a mix of frustration and disbelief. "You caught her?" he asked, his voice a mixture of incredulity and curiosity. Marcus nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. I was sitting right there," he said, pointing toward the bench. "I didn't want her to get hurt." Daniel's instinct was to push the boy away, to demand he leave, to restore order to what felt like a chaotic scene. Yet, as he looked closer, he realized there was no arrogance, no expectation of reward, only a simple statement of fact. The boy had acted without hesitation, without thought of gain. And suddenly Daniel felt a twinge of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years, respect. "You didn't take anything?" Daniel asked, almost instinctively, his voice harder than he intended. Marcus blinked, confusion and a hint of caution flickering across his face. "No, sir." Evelyn's hand rested lightly on Marcus's arm, a small gesture of reassurance. "Daniel," she said softly, a subtle rebuke in her tone, "he didn't need to. He acted out of kindness." Daniel's mind reeled. He had grown up in a world where kindness was measured, monitored, and often manipulated. Trust had a price. But here was a boy, a stranger, acting purely on instinct, on compassion, and Daniel didn't know how to process it. "Why were you talking to him?" Daniel asked more quietly, almost afraid of the answer. Evelyn glanced at Marcus, then back at Daniel. "Because he hasn't eaten since yesterday," she said simply, almost matter-of-factly. Daniel froze. His mind scrambled, trying to reconcile the images before him, the expensive car, the boardroom deals, the empire he controlled, with the raw reality of a teenage boy surviving on the streets. The juxtaposition was jarring, almost surreal. Marcus's hoodie hung loosely over his shoulders, his thin frame hunched slightly, yet there was a quiet dignity in the way he carried himself. He was alert, cautious, aware of every movement around him. And Daniel realized, with a painful clarity, that Marcus had been navigating a world far harsher than any corporate battle he had faced. Evelyn reached into her handbag and pulled out a small paper bag. "I bought him a sandwich," she said, offering it toward Marcus. But my knee gave out before I could hand it to him properly. Marcus hesitated, instinctively trying to refuse. Evelyn smiled gently. It's just a sandwich. Nothing more. Daniel watched the exchange silently, his chest tightening. He had signed contracts worth millions without thinking twice, yet here was his mother, struggling to hand over a simple meal to a stranger, and it felt like an act of profound courage. Daniel's attention returned to the boy. Where are your parents? He asked, his tone softer, though still laced with concern. My mom passed away 2 years ago, Marcus replied, his voice steady, though quiet. My dad left before that. Daniel's chest constricted. He remembered his own father, the sacrifices, the relentless struggle to climb out of poverty. And now he was staring at a boy who had been left to navigate life alone, surviving on instinct and resilience. How long have you been on the street? Daniel asked, almost automatically. 6 months, Marcus said simply. Evelyn placed a hand gently on Marcus's arm again, not leaning now, just resting it there as a protective gesture. He's been sleeping near the library, she said softly. He wants to finish school. Daniel blinked. School. Marcus nodded. I was in my last year. I just couldn't stay where I was. Daniel didn't press. He saw enough in Marcus's eyes, the determination, the exhaustion, the self-reliance that belied his age. He felt something stir inside him, a mixture of responsibility and admiration. The driver approached cautiously, standing a few steps behind Daniel. Sir, the car is ready, he said, his tone tentative. Daniel ignored him. This was no longer about schedules, appointments, or efficiency. This was about the unexpected, the human, the real. Marcus, Daniel said carefully, would you be willing to have dinner with us? Marcus's eyes widened. Sir, at our home, Daniel clarified. Just dinner. Marcus's instincts were immediately defensive. Why? Daniel hesitated, searching for words that felt honest yet commanding. Because tonight, when you could have walked away, you didn't, he said finally. Because you helped my mother when she needed it. Marcus looked at Evelyn for reassurance. She smiled warmly. It's just dinner, she said. After a long pause, Marcus nodded. Okay, he said quietly, still wary but willing to trust them, at least for the moment. As Daniel escorted his mother and the boy toward the car, he realized something profound. This encounter, brief as it was, had shaken the foundation of his controlled, calculated life. It had reminded him that there were things money could not fix, situations no contract could resolve, and lessons no boardroom could teach. And as the car doors closed behind them, the soft hum of the engine filling the silence, Daniel felt it, the subtle shift of perspective, the awakening of something he had long buried under ambition and wealth. Something that felt startlingly, painfully human. It wasn't pity. It wasn't guilt. It was recognition. And it was the beginning of a change he hadn't expected but couldn't ignore. The night stretched on ahead of them, wet and cold, but inside the car, there was a quiet warmth. Marcus sat beside his mother, clutching the sandwich she had finally handed him, and Daniel, for the first time in years, realized that power was not always measured in money. Sometimes, it was measured in choices, in actions, and in the courage to extend a hand when no one else would. And tonight, that hand had been offered, caught, and accepted. The house was silent when Marcus first stepped inside, save for the soft hum of the central heating and the faint clinking of cutlery from the kitchen staff who had been quietly finishing preparations for dinner. The sheer size of the Harrington estate was overwhelming. Hallways stretched farther than Marcus could see, walls were lined with books and paintings he couldn't begin to recognize, and the floors gleamed so brightly that his own reflection stared back at him like a stranger. Every step he took made a quiet echo, and he felt both out of place and watched, though there was no one else in the hallway. His heartbeat thudded in his chest, a mixture of awe and nerves. Evelyn Harrington led him through the grand dining room, where the long mahogany table was already set with plates, silverware, and crystal glasses that sparkled in the warm candlelight. She motioned for him to sit, her presence calm and reassuring. Dinner will be simple, she said. Nothing fancy. Just a proper meal. Marcus lowered himself into the chair with careful deliberation, eyes wide as he took in the surroundings. He had never sat at a table like this. The very idea that someone had prepared food specifically for him, someone who didn't have to, felt surreal. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, and yet there was a strange comfort in it, a warmth he hadn't felt in months. The meal itself was modest by the standards Marcus had imagined for a billionaire. Soup arrived first, rich and golden, accompanied by freshly baked bread. Then came roasted chicken and vegetables, seasoned perfectly, yet not pretentious. Evelyn insisted on keeping it simple, something she called comfort food for the soul. Marcus ate slowly, almost reverently, unsure how to act. He felt the unfamiliar luxury keenly, but he was determined not to let it make him behave differently than he would on any other night. Daniel Harrington sat across from him, watching carefully, noting every movement, every hesitation. Marcus could feel the weight of his gaze but ignored it, focusing instead on his meal. Every bite was deliberate, every sip of water measured. He thanked the staff quietly when food was placed before him, his voice soft but sincere. Daniel noticed, and in that small act of courtesy, he began to feel a mixture of respect and curiosity for this boy who had survived months on the streets with nothing but his wits and determination. Halfway through dinner, Evelyn excused herself quietly, saying she would rest for a moment. The house, which had felt so alive moments before, now seemed to stretch out in silence, leaving Marcus and Daniel alone at the table. Marcus shifted uneasily in his chair, unsure how to fill the gap. Daniel, however, seemed calm, almost deliberate. "You said you wanted to finish school," he began, his voice even, measured. "Tell me about it." Marcus nodded, trying to find the right words. "I was in my last year," he said cautiously. "Before everything changed. I was doing well, I thought I could make it." "What subjects?" Daniel asked, leaning slightly forward. "Math, physics," Marcus replied, his voice gaining a bit of confidence. "I wanted to be an engineer." Daniel's eyebrows lifted slightly. Physics. Engineering. The words sparked something inside him, something he hadn't realized he was missing, a connection to his own past, to the long hours spent learning the same subjects, to the dream he once had before ambition and inheritance had consumed his life. "Why didn't you go to a shelter?" Daniel asked carefully, his tone less harsh, more curious. Marcus hesitated, then spoke quietly. "Some places aren't safe." Daniel didn't press further. He had learned long ago that questions could be weapons if wielded carelessly. Instead, he rose from his chair. "Come with me," he said. Marcus blinked, unsure, but he followed. The two of them walked down a long hallway, past rooms filled with trophies, photographs, and books Marcus had never seen before. Daniel led him into a private office. The room was large, lined with dark wood bookshelves filled with volumes that Marcus guessed were expensive. Framed photos of Daniel's family decorated the shelves, including one that caught Marcus's attention, a picture of a younger Daniel standing with his father in front of a small grocery store. "That," Daniel said, pointing to the photo, "was our first business. We were broke. I did my homework behind the counter while my father worked 18 hours a day just to keep the lights on." Marcus studied the photograph, noting the tired, determined expression on the younger Daniel's face, the worn clothes, the small, cramped shop. "Wow," he breathed. Daniel's expression softened. "I haven't thought about that in years. But tonight, I was reminded of it." He paused, studying Marcus closely. "You caught my mother without hesitation." Marcus shrugged lightly. "Anyone would have." "No," Daniel said firmly. "Not anyone." There was a moment of silence. Marcus's gaze flickered between the imposing bookshelves and the man in front of him. He had grown up on the streets, learned to survive through instinct and caution. He had rarely met people who acted without self-interest. And yet here was a billionaire, someone with every advantage, telling him that what he did mattered. That he mattered. "Do you still have your school transcripts?" Daniel asked suddenly. Marcus's eyes widened in surprise. "In my bag," he said, fetching the worn, crumpled papers carefully from his backpack. He handed them over to Daniel, who examined them meticulously. The grades were exceptional, straight A's in nearly every subject, top marks in mathematics and physics. Daniel's brow lifted as he scanned the pages. Then, unexpectedly, he picked up his phone. "Karen," he said into the line, "contact Westbridge Academy first thing tomorrow. Full scholarship. Housing included. Find out what it takes to fast-track his college applications." Marcus's eyes widened in disbelief. "Sir, what are you doing?" Daniel put the phone down and looked at him squarely. "I'm investing," he said simply. "In potential." Marcus shook his head, a mixture of awe and disbelief. "I don't want charity," he said quietly, almost ashamed. Daniel's gaze softened. "It's not charity. It's a contract. You work hard, you finish school, and you become the engineer you've always wanted to be. One day, maybe you build something greater than I ever did." Marcus hesitated, then extended his hand. Daniel took it firmly, the handshake. Solid, a promise unspoken yet binding. Marcus felt a warmth he had never known, a sense of possibility that had been absent for too long. Daniel stepped back slightly, observing the boy with a mix of pride and caution. Across the hall, Evelyn had returned quietly, standing in the doorway with her hands folded gently in front of her. She watched the interaction, her eyes gleaming with quiet satisfaction. Her instinct had been right. This boy was not just resilient, he was exceptional. The room felt charged with something more than opportunity. It felt like a turning point, a moment where paths converged, and lives changed in ways that couldn't have been predicted. Marcus's eyes brimmed with unshed tears, the weight of his gratitude pressing down on him, the magnitude of the chance he had been offered almost too much to comprehend. Daniel finally spoke, his voice quieter now, more reflective. Sometimes the greatest investments aren't made in stocks or properties or companies. They're made in people who have the courage to do the right thing, even when no one is watching. Marcus nodded, still grasping the weight of the moment, still struggling to reconcile the world he had known with the world opening before him. That night, as Marcus left the office, escorted back to the dining room for a simple dessert Evelyn had prepared, he felt something he hadn't felt in months, a sense of belonging, of possibility, of being seen. The Harrington home, once intimidating and alien, now felt like a place where hope could grow. And as Daniel watched him eat quietly, observing every bite, he realized something profound. The boy's future had changed tonight, yes. But so had his own. For the first time in years, the billionaire wasn't thinking about profit or power. He was thinking about legacy, about impact, about the possibility of making a difference beyond the confines of wealth and influence. And across the room, Evelyn Harrington smiled softly, knowing that sometimes, the most important investments in life were those made in courage, integrity, and the quiet strength of a human heart willing to reach out when it mattered most. The night stretched on, warm and quiet, and for the first time, Marcus allowed himself to imagine a future beyond the streets. A future filled with knowledge, purpose, and the rare, precious gift of being believed in.